Hello and welcome to Shaka Extra Time. I am Paul Ndiho. Here with me in studio is Shaka SSALI himself, aka the Kawale Kid. Hello, Shaka.
You bet. I'm hugely terrific.
Good to see you. A warm welcome to you all our Facebook followers are watching us live here in Washington. Shaka Extra Time is a place where you get to talk to Shaka the man. Today we'll be talking about Burundi. But before we go to Burundi, let's maybe start in England, talk about the royal wedding. What an incredible event, Shaka. Everybody is still talking about it. Particularly, for me, I was not particularly impressed because of my own biased view about the royal family. But your thoughts?
You really happen not to be one of the more than 3 billion human beings who somehow were either able to watch or at least monitor on various media platforms what was happening in Britain on Saturday, May 19.
I will confess that I didn't watch it live, but later on I was able to catch up with what was happening there.
Well, I guess that you don't have to worry very much because some of your cousins in Kenya, they went to a very interesting hotel where you and I have been. It's called the Windsor, actually built and owned by now the late John Michuki. And guess what? It's a hotel. It has a golf club. It is a county lounge, a beautiful place. They paid 1 million Kenyan shillings. Translated in US dollars, exactly from the latest rate I saw, you're talking about $9,925 US dollars only to simply watch the event in Britain on a large television screen, which I'm sure some of these people probably actually do have at home. They also had, of course, very good nyama choma in the elite way. They also had to fly the following morning by helicopter to Mount Kenya for breakfast. Man, you're talking about almost 10,000 US dollars in a country where you have millions and millions of people who actually live in Kibera, in Mathare, and do not have a guarantee of a single meal a day.
Shaka, that's remarkable. I can't imagine myself paying even a cent to watch a wedding, and here somebody is paying $10,000 to watch a wedding that you can watch on any screen anywhere. That's insane.
But guess, I mean, look, you're talking
what was so important, what was so special about that wedding that people are paying $10,000 to watch it on screen?
The British royal family, my friend, the House of Windsor. The House of Windsor has actually been in power for more than 1,000 years. That is history, my friend. That's history. And guess what? There was a time, and I'm sure you also read it, because I read the same history. There was a time when Britain, or England as it were, was Great Britain. And it pretty much was in charge of the world, the planet Earth, in terms of they ruled, presided over an empire where the sun never set. So this is history, my friend.
Yes, I agree with all that, but for me, to be honest with you, I've been watching repeats of what transpired over the weekend, and there were a lot, there was a lot to take in, especially considering that the royal family maybe was passing on the baton. It officially crossed into the other territory, bring into a black person into the royal family. And I think it was long overdue. But if you ask me, I would say that maybe this whole institution is archaic. Maybe they need to revamp it or get rid of it.
You know, you saw, of course, the great African-American bishop, Michael Bruce Carey, who was born in Chicago, by the way, a place, of course, where former first black president Barack Obama calls home, Chicago. And by the way, even the now Duchess of Sussex, Meghan Markle, actually studied, guess what? In the neighborhood of Chicago. She did theater arts, and international relations. And the first part, of course, in Uganda, where you went to school at Markle, they used to call it Musiru Daradara, rather than really Magezi Daradara. She studied theater arts at Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois, my friend. And this bishop graduated in 1978 from Yale University. This bishop believes in social justice for all of us. And you know, the theme for his sermon was how powerful love can be. And he talked about these two young people, symbolized really, not only love between themselves, not only love between their families, but it was some sort of a reflection of a greater love, meaning we're talking about God here, the Almighty, and you're talking about an opportunity for these great communities, frankly, coming together. You're talking about the first something very, very major in history. The first time you have seen a member of the African community, a descendant of Africans, actually being united with perhaps one of history's most powerful royal families, the House of Windsor. This is great. You had Oprah Winfrey there. You had Serena Williams there. You had a lot of people there, my friend, but very few people.
Yeah, but think about it. Let's look at it in the context of Africa. The Royal Kingdom has had a greater relationship with Africa, especially in light of they were our former colonizers.
This was a relationship of master-servant.
Correct, correct. But so let's look, what does this symbolic or this reunion mean in the larger context?
It means, first of all, that the concept of love has no boundaries. It has no borders. It is a great force that unites people, that can, in fact, unite the world. You have an opportunity to have a conversation. I mean, look at a man who happens to be the father of Prince Harry. You're talking about someone I grew up, of course, watching and all kind of stuff, Prince Charles, the man who is supposed to be first in line to be the King of England, if his mother, you know, should do him a favor and step down. Look how he was treating the mother of Meghan Markle. You saw that kind of dynamic?
Absolutely, yeah.
You can see things are changing, because basically what you are seeing now is that the world is not static. It is dynamic. This is a beginning of a great opportunity for a conversation between these three important communities. One, African, given that the Duchess of Sussex has, you know, traces her, you know, origins from Africa, but also she's an American. In fact, it is the first time a member of the American nation or community is marrying into that great royal family. It is also the first time that a clergy, a bishop, a preacher, not only as an African American, but in fact as an American, to get the opportunity to preside over that great event. And mind you, he had about 14 minutes. And he said, when one of his aides received the telephone call coming from, I think, the Archbishop of Canterbury, that he was actually being invited to participate, he couldn't believe it. He thought it was a joke. He thought, this must be like April Fool's Day or that kind of stuff. But this is big. This is a big story, at least symbolically. Maybe it's not something that you touch and feel, but symbolically, it is huge.
Let's hope that that reunion or that royal wedding can bring peace to Africa. As that, let's maybe segue to Burundi.
Yes.
We are talking about a country that just voted for a referendum. In fact, 73% of the population voted in favor of amending the constitution, changing, removing term limits, and potentially allowing the current president, Pierre Nkurunziza, to run until 2034. So what's the magic word. What's the magic number? That 2034, is it a magic number? Rwanda seems to talk about 2034. Now we have Burundi talking about 2034. Your thoughts on that?
Well, maybe it is something to do with political insecurity. A man like Pierre Nkurunziza, I have no doubt, by the way, that if he actually offered himself in a situation where you had the political playing field being leveled, where you had all these forces having opportunity to sell their message and what have you, I have no doubt, having actually had an interaction with him about 2 years ago, that he would actually be elected president of Burundi. What I probably don't like, and probably what other people also who know Burundi very well don't like, is probably the manner in which it happened. It does not, frankly, seem to have been a situation where the process was inclusive, where people who have a different point of view had the same opportunity like the CNDD, the FDD ruling group had to sell their message. But I can say to you that it also is a reflection probably of what in fact is the history of Burundi. You know, Burundi begins in the beautiful mountains of the northern part of the country called Mulanzia. This is where the great kings used to rule from. The last king, I think, was Mwambusha. He was overthrown in the mid-60s. He was called a Muganwa. A Muganwa was meant to be, in terms of social ladder, he was supposed to be above everybody. You have a Muganwa, then you have Tutsi, then you have Bantu or Hutu, and then you have Pygmies, the Batwa. So the only person that seemed to have actually somehow managed to sort of create a magic in the sense that he was very much liked across the board was a prince called Prince Louis Rwagasore, who was the first Burundian prime minister. He was assassinated in Tanganyika restaurant, downtown Burundi, in Bujumbura, in fact, downtown Bujumbura, where some of my friends had lunch about 2 years ago, which was granted by a foreign minister who is Alan Nyamitwe, but of course now he's former Minister of Foreign Affairs because we have a new foreign minister. And I remember I was able to meet a Muganwa who happened to be a nephew of Prince Rwagasore, my friend Jean-Marie Ngendahayo, who used to be Burundi's foreign minister. And he used to be a very close ally of the first Burundian democratically elected president. He was a Hutu, but he was not simply a Hutu. He was the first Burundian to be democratically elected to become president in 1993. But guess what? The mono-ethnic Tutsi army, and it was in fact mono-ethnic Tutsi army. And I had the opportunity back in 1994 to actually even have an opportunity to go to the officers' mess. I was taken by a very senior military officer, Nicodemus. He was a Colonel Nicodemus Nduhirubusa. And I remember meeting some of my fans. By then I was apparently doing very well on radio. And some of those Burundian fans, officers who had been training in the United States, I remember asking them, could you please show me at least 3 or 4 military officers, including a Muganwa, a Hutu, and a Pygmy. They just looked at me and laughed. I said, what do you mean? They said, you want these people to kill us? I said, what do you mean? And you call yourself Balundi? You're just Tutsi. Because a Captain Michel Michombero, Michael Michombero, in the mid-60s, a man who came from Bururi, in southern Burundi, overthrew the king and took over and was in power for so many years. He was overthrown by another member of the same community from Burundi, Bagaza, and another person later overthrew Bagaza called Buyoya, also from Burundi.
Shaka, let's move on.
From the Rutovu presidential hero, they said. So, my friend, you have 93, the first time you have a Hutu in office. He's assassinated by the mono-ethnic Tutsi army. And then you have a man called
Shaka, I think a lot of I don't think a lot of people are interested in the historical context. They want to know what is happening now, especially in light that this constitutional amendment sort of takes away the positions that were held by two vice presidents and empowers the president. It gives the president more power. People want you to talk about that kind of stuff.
You are right, yeah. But you see, in order for you to understand where these people are, why they are probably doing that, you probably, in fact, have to reflect back where they are coming from. There is no question that this new referendum essentially makes the president in Burundi a man who almost has absolute power, because he has, for the first time, what you would call a negative veto power. For example, Parliament can pass a bill, but unless that bill is ascended by the president, it cannot become law. And after 30 days, he doesn't have to sign it. He frustrates Parliament. Also, for the first time, you do not have any pretense of sharing the executive power. You have, until yesterday, you have the Arusha Peace Accord, which required that you share the executive between a president and two vice presidents. And one of the vice presidents has to come from the minority community. Now you don't have that, because now you only have one vice president who effectively becomes an assistant president. And then you have a creation of a prime minister. But this prime minister really, yes, he coordinates the cabinet or the government, what have you, but he really does not have power. His only role is to implement what the president wants.
Shaka, one of the opposition leaders, who perhaps one of the few remaining opposition leaders in Burundi, Agathon Rwasa, who leads the Amaziro y'Abarundi, the opposition party, has threatened to challenge this referendum, to go to court. Do you think he will get justice there?
Well, I don't know, because first of all, you have to figure out what kind of powers does the Burundi judiciary system have. Already we know, for example, back in 2015, the Supreme Court, or is it the Constitutional Court, was able to pretty much go along with what was the need of then incumbent president, Pierre Nkurunziza. So what makes Mr. Rwasa think that this time around the Supreme Court might come up with some magic? And besides, let's face it, whether you like it or not, the process is seen to be democratic because people came out and voted. So they have created a situation in the politics which they call, you create facts. Once you create facts, my friend, the next thing is about negotiation.
But how can you say the process seems to look democratic when they were literally forcing people to go and vote? People are being beaten up, people are being arrested.
First of all, I don't know. I don't know about that, because I remember that I was not on the ground. I have read various...
There are media reports that suggest that, and even the opposition is talking about that.
Yeah, but then again, let's face it, when you think about what happened in Burundi, can you tell me that it is significantly different from, in fact, what happens pretty much in the Great Lakes region? Can you tell me that's different from what happened in Rwanda? Can you tell me that is different from what happened in Uganda?
Probably not. There are a lot of similarities, but when you look at what has been going on in Burundi, you look at over 400,000 people have fled the country. Literally, almost all the other opposition people are out of the country, and now we have this quote-unquote referendum that you seem to suggest that it's a democratic process.
I am not suggesting. I am saying it followed a process that seems to be democratic.
Okay.
Didn't they vote? You know, it is like talking about Zimbabwe, for example. When you look at Zimbabwe, I am sure we'll get there, why it withdrew from the Commonwealth. Back in 2003, the reason being that earlier, a year earlier, that country had actually been suspended by the Commonwealth, which argued that Zimbabwe had actually conducted an election that was deemed to be undemocratic and was persecuting members of the opposition. And yet, let's face it, about the same time, you were having those types of elections in that particular region, which involved member countries of the Commonwealth. Those things happened. They happened in Uganda. Nothing happened. Rwanda is even a member, even though it is not a former colony of the British, is actually a member of the Commonwealth. But it happens, okay?
Yeah.
Now, what people do not tell you probably is that the Commonwealth, or at least the people who control the Commonwealth, were simply punishing Zimbabwe, not so much because it was not being undemocratic, and I'm not saying it was democratic, but rather because of the decision Zimbabwe made about land which was owned by white commercial farmers, and therefore their relationship with the forces that controlled that institution. So when you talk about democracy, you should use one standard, not one, not two, not three, because democracy is democracy, at least as described by Abraham Lincoln. It should be a government of the people, by the people, for the people. Not a government of some people, by some people, for some people.
Perfect segue to our comments. Let's start with Kayode Eweka in Nigeria. Democracy being the best system of government to the West may not be Africans' best on our cultural differences. What do you think, Shaka?
First of all, Kayode, really, let's be honest. I don't think the problem here is democracy. Rather, it is the manner in which some of the people who are fortunate to be in charge of African countries, the manner and the way in which they have tried either to govern or to rule for that matter. Because let's face it, we do have some blind spots on the continent. It is not the entire Africa that is undemocratic. Because when we go, for example, to a place called Senegal, there is democracy. Democracy is about fairness. It's about justice. It's about accountability. It's about dignity. It's about character. It's about those types of things. You have democracy in Senegal, and frankly, Senegalese are not going to make excuses that because they are not Europeans, they are practicing a blend of democracy that is pretty much a reflection of what you would call a universal language. You stay in the area. You look at Liberia. How did George Weah become president? You go to Sierra Leone. How did, for example, Brigadier Julius Maada Bio become president there? You go to Benin. And then you go to South Africa. You go to Botswana. You go to Namibia, where my friend Dr. Hage Geingob is president, and apparently may in fact be the host of the Duke and the Duchess of Sussex during their honeymoon. So there is democracy. You go to Mauritius, there is democracy. But there is no question that more countries on the continent are not democratic. They are dictatorships, and they should be called as such.
Let's go to another comment. Let's stay in Nigeria. From Echinyiri Nzifi. Shaka, what needs to overcome the incident of predetermined elections on the continent, especially in Nigeria? Or you can also maybe talk about the election that we just talked about, the referendum in Burundi. He wants to get your thoughts. It was a predetermined outcome.
I think really I have talked about that before, and I will do it again, Paul. I think that we know, for example, that there was a time when military coups were in vogue, not only in Africa but in the world. And it didn't matter. Whichever country woke up very early with his AK-47 or tanks, they shot their way to State House, and the international community allowed to do business with them as usual. But it reached a point where the international community said, no, you cannot be recognized if you seize power by means of force without being democratically elected. I think this is a standard, frankly, that I have been talking about that should be adopted by the international community. That if you conduct an election that does not meet democratic threshold or democratic standards, really, you should not be recognized. You should not be allowed to be a member of the international community. You should be denied the opportunity to claim to be a government. And if that were to happen, I think there's no problem that people would not do it, because people still want to interact with other people. You look at, for example, the African Union. They recognized the referendum in Rwanda. A referendum, frankly, which a lot of people say was not a referendum, rather it was a military political operation that gave President Paul Kagame about 99% only. Let's be honest. You think that man is probably as popular as Jesus Christ or Prophet Muhammad? Because even Jesus had his own Iscariots. And so you have to use the same standard. If you look at Pierre Nkurunziza, you should look at him in the same context. You looked at the man in charge of Kigali. If you look at what is happening in Uganda, of course, the same thing. Why do you tolerate so and so? And then you say you have a problem with the other guy. But they are actually playing the same ball. You just recently had, for example, another constitutional change in Chad. Idris Deby. What have you heard about that man? You don't hear anything about that from the same quarters.
Because he's the former chairman
of the African Union, yes. And probably...
Shaka, what are you talking about tomorrow on the Straight Talk Africa?
Tomorrow I am looking again at a very sad situation. We're looking at the obtaining crisis in the Republic of South Sudan, a country by any measure that should really be going along very well, having its people fed, its children going to school, its sick taken care of, because it has incredible resources. It should in fact be in the business of importing people to come and help develop their country. But right now, they are busy killing each other, even though they are very, very few people. And so we're going to look at whether or not, in fact, what is going on in Addis Ababa, under IGAD, the regional grouping, whether, in fact, these are peace talks or, as some would say, peace jokes.
Let's go to Eddie Mutawa. But our people, he's talking about South Sudan. Our people are, our leaders are making our people cry, especially in South Sudan. What can African leaders do to stop this, whatever is going on in South Sudan?
You see, he has it wrong from his premise. He says our leaders. Surely, if those were leaders, if they were leaders that reflected leadership qualities, which means, for example, fairness, which means justice, socio-economic justice, which means integrity, character, and accountability, they wouldn't be doing those things to their people. That's why I'm tempted sometimes to say, yes, we had colonialism. And these were foreigners who conquered our territories and came and behaved in a very strange manner. But we seem now to have what I would characterize as probably indigenous colonialists who don't care about their own people.
Yeah, Shaka, we have to wrap it up. Thank you so much. It's once again a pleasure talking to you. I look forward to hosting you on another edition of Straight Talk. For programming note, I'll be off next week. Until then, I'll see you another time. Thank you so much.